The 2016 election also saw Michael Bennett face not much of a fight for re-election, even though the final numbers were closer than anyone figured. Mike Coffman faced a fierce fight from Morgan Carroll in the 6th CD, but ended up winning by over 8 points. While the majorities in the state legislature stayed the same, voters seemed to be in a yes mood, passing 2 state amendments and 3 different propositions. David, from what you saw, what was the most surprising outcome on the local level?
The differential you just mentioned of Scott losing by only 3 points in the statewide Senate race against Bennett versus Morgan Carroll losing by 8 against Glenn, losing by 8 points. Glenn only losing by 3, Carroll losing by 8. Nobody at this table ever predicted anything remotely close to that. I don't think anything I read by any political writer in Colorado predicted that. And it wasn't that the writers were all ignoring something that was going on or we're being irrational. It's just that politics is a little more unusual, which makes it more interesting ultimately. But boy, this is a race that the Republicans could have picked up the Senate seat. As it turned out, Michael Bennett, all these hysterical emails that he kept sending out for the last 2 years of, I'm the most targeted Democratic senator. We can't keep the Senate. If I lose, I'm the most in danger. I'm an endangered species. Give me money now, please, before midnight, or I may not make it. I'm like Tinkerbell. It turned out he was right. Man, if their national Republican Party had put in some money in this, or if the Republicans had built a good enough infrastructure for a grassroots Senate campaign, that might have turned out differently. And boy, Morgan Carroll, she's a strong candidate. She worked her heart out. You could make small criticisms of what she did, but if a candidate that strong can't even only comes 8 points behind Mike Coffman, I think that says in 2018, 2020, Democrats shouldn't bother with that race, and they should wait until 2022 when he might be redistricted into something tougher.
Eric, there's a lot of things to take on here, the propositions, the amendments, but also looking at the Senate race, do you think state Republicans are going to be kicking themselves for a while that they didn't, even if not getting a different candidate, but not even getting behind it? Darryl Glenn didn't have enough cash to put out a TV ad until mid-October. It was a U.S. Senate race, and he still came within 3 points, and that was actually managed as a decent campaign. Even with who he was, he had a shot. It seems to me a lot of Republicans can be sitting back saying, man, we could have had that.
Just for accuracy, I think it was a little over 4 points, but the point remains that it was much closer than anyone anticipated. Yes, there have to be some what-ifs. Given the tenor of the year, there have to be what-ifs among the Colorado Republican Party that they didn't take full advantage of the opportunity. That is not a new theme for the Colorado Republican Party. I think this year showed that and we commented on this after the election, there is not an inexorable march in Colorado from red to purple to some shade of blue. I think we are firmly in the purple column. I always look at the ballot to try to find one race down low on the ballot that really received no money, no public attention, and that tells you what the tenor of the year was. For me this year, it was a race for the CU Board of Regents, the at-large seat, between 2 very accomplished women. Alice Madden was the Democrat, Heidi Ganahl was the Republican. Both very credible, good candidates. And neither, those are way down the political food chain, don't get a lot of attention. In this case, Heidi Ganahl won that race by 7 points. That tells me what this year was about. That explains the closeness of the Senate race that no one saw. That explains the victory margin for Mike Coffman, et cetera. On the ballot issues, real quickly, I think there were 3 themes. Political reform, yes. Amendment 71, Amendments 107 and 108 to open up primaries to unaffiliateds, et cetera. Autonomy, yes. That was Amendment 106 in terms of medical aid and dying, and I think that was a theme in some other ballot issues. Tax increases, no. Whether it was Colorado Care or whether it was the tobacco tax, those went down and went down pretty substantially, overwhelmingly in the case of Colorado Care.
Penn, in 2016, Mike Coffman got both barrels. He had a national funding from Democrats coming at him. He had Morgan Carroll, who is from Aurora, who had significant political backing. This was not just a run-the-mill Democratic candidate. And he still won by 8 points. Does he get perlmutter status now?
I don't think so. And I think that he'll continue to draw strong opposition. And I think part of that is Mike's fault for some of the positions he's taking. I mean, you know, he began to disavow and distance himself, but he was part of the birther movement with a number of other folks early on, and people remember that. I think what all of these elections show us is that, and I wish I could come up with a better color. I don't know if Colorado is purple, because what we now see is we probably have 4 or 5 political parties here. We have the left wing of the Democratic Party and the moderate wing of the Democratic Party, and the right wing of the Republican Party and the moderate wing of the Republican Party. And I think that describes a lot of what happened and how. Michael Bennett could have been beaten, you know, clearly. But there were many in the Republican establishment who did not want Darryl Glenn as their candidate. They thought he was too extreme. They thought he was too fringe. And they thought he couldn't get there. So he couldn't raise money locally. And were it not for national forces bringing in some money, he probably wouldn't have been as competitive as he was, which was surprising. And Eric's right. He couldn't run a TV until the very last minute. And many people thought it was a workout video rather than a political TV commercial, because you didn't know to the end that this was the guy running for the U.S. Senate. He didn't even say it. But he still came close to beating an incumbent senator. Mike Coffman, you know, Morgan Carroll is no slouch. She ran a good race. She ran a credible race. She touched on all of the right issues. But at the end, Mike Coffman is doing TV commercials with people from, you know, who had their origins in different countries in Africa. So he's pulling in the immigrant community, not a community he'd been associated with necessarily during the bulk of his career, and not one that he'd necessarily spoken favorably of. And so, you know, you got the whole Sanders and Cruz thing. So coalitions in Colorado are much more fluid than they once were. And to Eric's point, I think it simply reemphasizes the fact that whether that you have an R or a D behind your name, at a certain level, Colorado voters really pay attention to the candidate and the person running for that race.
Be Colorado's political code of many colors.
Yes,
something like that. Okay.
Something like that. The Technicolor code.
I like that. Patty, wrap it up for us. Were you surprised at all the yes votes on the amendments and propositions?
Well, certainly by 71. I think most of us at this table thought that would go down, partly because of the cranky electorate, the ones who wanted a part in the primary, they want to say, but they didn't. They bought all the lines about how easy it was to amend the Constitution, even though now it's going to be a system that is going to make it very hard for citizens to come forward and do, say, what Dick Lamb did back in '72 with the Olympics. I mean, if you have to get all 35 Senate districts putting in a fair number of votes to push through a petition, it's going to be very tough. So that was a surprise. The fact that it was so close for Michael Bennett was certainly a surprise, because Darryl Glenn was almost non-existent in the media. He wasn't in the Post after he had refused to give interviews. He gave us a very brief interview and then just disappeared. I think if he'd been more present, because he's an interesting character, he might have done well. The other thing, you can color Colorado bruise purple. I mean, didn't everyone just feel bruised after that election? It was a mess, and not black and blue, just bruised purple. But the game has changed so much now because of social media. You don't have the yard signs. You don't need to go knock on every door. You can reach every voter easily on your own without buying TV time. And I think we'll see a lot of new smart strategists come up.